Well, now back to the federal trial of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Jury selection is set to be taking place right now in a courtroom in Virginia, and opening arguments will likely begin later this week. Manafort is facing trial on federal tax and bank fraud charges, and he could face the rest of his life behind bars. While the focus is on Manafort's alleged financial crimes, the Russia investigation is casting a long shadow over the trial. Let's go now to our Joe Johns, who is outside the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. Joe, jury selection starts this hour. The first case to be brought to trial under the special counsel Robert Mueller, and the accused is Trump's chairman.
Yeah, this is a big moment, certainly for Robert Mueller, and it's big because he has chosen to take Paul Manafort, the former campaign chairman, to trial in his very first trial on this case, his very first litigation in this case. And it's about bank fraud. It's not really having anything to do with collusion or Russian interference in the 2016 election. It's about whether Paul Manafort, working over a period of years, in fact received $60 million from Ukraine, essentially put that money in offshore banks and didn't tell the tax collectors, the IRS. So that's the issue we're hearing now. And in fact, we're not expecting to hear a lot about collusion or any of those other things. As you said, jury selection today. I also want to point out there was some housekeeping earlier today in the trial over whether to admit evidence of Mr. Manafort's work in Ukraine. The judge decided not to rule on all of those, apparently planning to rule as the prosecution attempts to enter those pieces of evidence and put them before the jury. So we have 3 weeks potentially here with about 36 witnesses, and Paul Manafort faces another trial. That one would be in the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. later this year. Linda.
All right, Joe Johns, we will be following this case very closely today. Good to have you outside that courtroom. Thanks so much. Well, joining me now to discuss the Manafort trial and more is David Priess. He's a former CIA intelligence officer who provided the daily intelligence briefing for Robert Mueller during his tenure as FBI director. He's also the author of the President's Book of Secrets. David, good to have you with us.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Mueller ran the FBI for 12 years, from 2001. You provided his daily intelligence briefing notes. Right now, he is being attacked by the U.S. president. How big a test is this trial today for him, and how do you think he's handling this case so far?
Yeah, it's big in one way and not so big in another. As we just heard, it's not so big in terms of the Russian conspiracy case. And let's get rid of the word collusion, because the president seems to have been distracted by that word not being listed in the U.S. criminal code. But conspiracy is. This trial is not about that, but it is big in a couple of ways. First of all, the trial is likely to include Rick Gates, Paul Manafort's deputy, who will be talking about the issues on trial here having to do with bank fraud and those types of issues. But Rick Gates continued on with the transition when Paul Manafort was gone in 2016. So this is our first window into what Gates is going to say as a cooperating witness, which will be relevant for the other aspects of the Mueller investigation. The other way that this is big is because it could be a win for the special counsel's office. So far, there have been a lot of indictments put out there, but let's be honest, they're not going to bring these Russian military officers to trial in the United States. That's not going to happen. This is one that the special counsel can say, we've got the goods on somebody, they have violated the law, and we're going to prove it in a court of law. That will probably help quiet some of the voices that are complaining that the special counsel investigation is going too long.
Manafort, we know, is facing up to 300 years in prison based on the charges today. What's the likelihood he'll plead guilty and make a deal with the special counsel, but perhaps to offer up a bigger fish, more information on perhaps Donald Trump's involvement?
Right. Just within the last few minutes, his attorney has come out and said no deal, and they are saying that they are not going to cooperate. Now, there's one major play there, and that is Paul Manafort looking at the president and basically winking and saying, pardon? Pardon me?
Right. So do you think that's
that
likely?
will happen.
Because we know Manafort has been kept in isolation in a prison, so Trump's people have not been able to offer him a presidential pardon or any other way out. Is it likely that he expects Donald Trump to do that?
People who predict what Donald Trump is going to do have been proven wrong so many times that I don't want to put a prediction on it, but we can say this. Donald Trump has pardoned people who came out of the blue in some cases, always talking about because they were treated unfairly, that these were people who did not get treated fairly by the system. If he thinks that these charges against Paul Manafort, which have to do with receiving somewhere around $60 million for his consulting work in Ukraine, and then funneling it through foreign accounts, through hiding it from the tax authorities, that sounds a lot like some of the investigations going on with the Trump organization. And if he thinks that Paul Manafort is being treated unfairly because of the way they're looking into that business, that is the kind of thing that he has pardoned for before.
Right. You mentioned collusion. I just want to play some sound from Donald Trump because we have heard a lot over the last 14 months since this investigation began. A lot of Donald Trump saying there is no collusion. Let's just take a listen.
They found no collusion whatsoever with Russia. There has been no collusion. They won't find any collusion. It doesn't exist.
There's no collusion with me and the Russians. Nobody's been tougher to Russia.
There was no collusion. No collusion, which I knew anyway. No coordination, no nothing.
Well, today we are seeing a shift in tone. President Trump putting out a tweet saying collusion is not a crime, and even if it was, there was no collusion. And of course, he then refers against crooked Hillary and the Democrats. And this is the line that his lawyer started taking yesterday, Rudy Giuliani, saying, I don't even know if collusion is a crime. Why do you think they're changing their tone here?
Well, I think it's because the walls are closing in, that as we learn more, as we have cooperating witnesses, as more reporting, frankly, is coming out telling us what Bob Mueller has probably known for months about this situation, I think the president feels the pressure and realizes he can no longer deny that there were contacts with the Russians during the campaign. That ship sailed long ago. He can no longer deny that some of these discussions were timed in a very odd fashion, right around when some of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager's emails were released, right after he called for those to be released. He can't deny that. So you close the walls in a little bit and you find now we're talking semantics. He's saying no collusion over and over again. He's not saying there was no criminal conspiracy. Just because it's not stated as collusion in the criminal code doesn't mean it's not a crime. That's like saying lighting a fire isn't a crime on a public building because it's not stated so in the code. Well, it's called arson. There's just a different word for it. In this case, it's criminal conspiracy.
Right. David Priess, great to have you on this program and good to have you clarifying all of that for us. Thanks so much.
Good to be here. Thank you.